Okay, welcome back everybody to lecture 2 this week. So we're in planning, and we were going then from the scope statement and breaking down that detailed scope statement into this work breakdown structure. We say in project management, if it's not in the work breakdown structure, it is not in my project, right? And that's how we avoid scope creep, right? By having a detailed work breakdown structure. If an item in the work breakdown structure doesn't directly apply to the scope statement and accomplishing it, get rid of it, right? That's called gold plating. We do not, because companies spend financial resources to implement this strategic activity called a project. We don't want to do extra stuff. Gold plating, if it's not in the scope statement, if it's not in the work breakdown structure, it is not in my project. And those were developed from the business case, drilling down to the charter, and now into the detailed plan, right? So this has what is to be done, and when is it going to be finished, and how are we going to define it. In fact, the work breakdown structure normally looks like an organizational chart, right? Not a lot of information. There's always a second element that goes with it, and that's called the work breakdown structure dictionary. And in the dictionary, we're going to have all the details that we need on the project, right? And from this work breakdown structure later, so we're taking the scope statement and decomposing it. That's the tool we use, decomposing the scope statement into this work breakdown structure. When we're done with that, it ends at an item called the work package. When we're done with that, later we'll continue decomposing into activities. Activities form our schedule, and from the scope and the schedule, I can develop the cost pretty easily. Okay. The work breakdown structure is almost always referred to as hierarchical. It's a hierarchical object, right? So like picture an organizational chart in your mind with the boxes, the CEO at the top, and then some VPs, and then some directors, and then some workers below it. That's a hierarchy. Well, so will the work breakdown structure be a hierarchy. You'll start with the scope statement, then you'll list the major tasks, and then you're going to break down each of those major tasks. So for example, if I'm building a bike, if a bike is my scope statement, my next set of packages would be, well, I need to build the handlebars, I need to build the tires, I need to build the frame. Under the tires, I might further break that down into left front tire and back tire, because the back tire is more complex with the gears and the brakes and other lights and other things. Okay? All right. So you might use a form like this to assist in the hierarchical planning to give you some guidance on what to write down. They have a good discussion of that in the book. Please refer there. So the work breakdown structure, like I said, is always referred to as hierarchical. And so it breaks down, as I said, into the finer levels, and later is going to help us develop down into activities. Activities become the schedule, and in the schedule, I'm able to then aggregate back up, aggregate meaning adding up from the bottom, aggregate back up through the work breakdown structure to add up all my costs to make sure I've got a good cost structure. Here is a hierarchical view of the work breakdown structure as we've discussed. Now in this slide is kind of there's a lot here. I recognize that, but what I was trying to do is give you a one-slide summary of all things work breakdown structure related. So I start on the right showing you the hierarchy, level 1, level 2, level 3. Notice the lowest level of a work breakdown structure is called a work package, and that would be in this case level 3. I would call level 3 the work packages, right? And so underneath what I have is I'm tying the scope statement to the work breakdown structure. So notice on a few slides back, we built the scope statement, right? The team actually built that with you. Then I was able to break that down through decomposition into, and there are no dependencies in that hierarchy picture above. There are no dependencies indicated. These are just how packages relate to each other to satisfy scope. doesn't say which comes first and which comes second in a priority order, right? That the schedule is going to do. So the work breakdown structure breaks that down into work packages and deliverables. And then I'm going to add to that, because it's not enough information in those boxes in that hierarchy. I need more details. Who's running the package? What are the safety standards? What is the due date? What are their constraints and assumptions, et cetera, et cetera. Those details are going to be in the work breakdown structure dictionary, okay? And from there, once I have my scope statement previously discussed and the work breakdown structure here discussed and the WBS dictionary, once I have all three, those three items form what I call, and project management calls, the scope baseline. The scope baseline is the scope statement, the work breakdown structure, the hierarchical structure, and the WBS dictionary, okay? Over to the left, I have some items that you'll find interesting. Just read for yourself about the work breakdown structure. And what I do at the bottom is I discuss, when do you stop breaking down the work breakdown structure? When do you stop? And there's some good hints there. Not required for any exam, just good one-stop shop knowledge, okay? So we are going to, so these are steps from the book. They're very similar to build or create a work breakdown structure, right? So I want to break down in successive levels. You saw that in the hierarchy. Identify the data for each work package. That's going to go in a work breakdown structure dictionary. Then I'm going to review the work package information. Always review, right? Plan, do, check, act. Plan, do, check, act. That's Deming's cycle. I'm going to add control accounts to each work breakdown structure item, and that way I can add them up using the control accounts, and I can manage my costs by work package, but aggregate them up into a single budget. I'm going to further break down through decomposition after the work packages the items, the hierarchy, into activities, and those activities become items in my schedule. And then, of course, plan, do, check, act, okay? Of course, we can't do a work breakdown structure very well or manage any of this without a conversation about human resources, right? What we need to execute the work breakdown structure. Notice a breakdown structure is hierarchy. It's similar to, at the bottom line, an OBS, an organizational breakdown structure. That's something we get from human resources, right? Where it's similar to the work breakdown structure, but the work breakdown structure is only about the scope. This is about the human resources that apply to that scope. So an organizational break structure is similar to a work breakdown structure, but the WBS is about the scope, breaking it down into deliverables, and the OBS is about resource management. Now, to manage these resources, I like a RACI. RACI matrix is very popular. RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consult, and inform. Who do I consult with? Who do I inform? Who's responsible for this activity? Who's ultimately accountable, right? And that's what we're going to have in the RACI. It is a good structure. Now, there are several other ways you could manage your resources to define roles and responsibilities. So once you have the work, you need to define these roles and responsibilities to do them. You could do some sort of hierarchical organizational chart. We just called it an OBS. That's the organizational breakdown structure. Or we could use a matrix chart. A RAM is a type of matrix chart. That's called the responsibility assignment matrix. The difference between a RAM and a RACI, you see the RACI in red below it. A RACI is a type of RAM, right? So they'll look similar, but they're not. A RAM is higher level. It's mostly at the work package level. A RACI is drilling down responsible, accountable, consult, or inform into the activity level, which is really at the schedule level. So I like a RACI better. It is more detail. Or when I was in the military, and maybe some of you in your commercial world, you have a written roles and responsibilities, right? My performance report in the military was a 5-line summary of what I did for the company, for the Air Force, right? It can be written too, but I like a RACI. Here's a picture of a RACI. I only listed a few items there. So if the activity is to create the charter, you see we're going to consult with Andy, but a guy named DB was accountable for making sure it got done, the one person. Then I had other units, it doesn't matter what their names are. I was responsible, and I would inform. For collect requirements, they would consult with Andy, which was actually me in this slide. And DB was still accountable, but I would consult. Another response. Notice there can be, notice on line 3, there can be more than one that's responsible. They all might have responsible pieces, but on every single line, there's only one person actually accountable for getting it done. That is the key to the RACI. And you see it broken down by activity, as opposed to a RAM I mentioned, which is a little higher. Now, that's all I really wanted to discuss, largely from the perspective of traditional or progressive predictive project management or waterfall, right? That's what the PMP exam is about, and that's generally what we talk about. But then there's this agile form of project management, and I don't see the major gulf between them. I see them mostly as a hybrid today, but now we'll talk in terms of agile, right? So agile project management was built to deal with issues in IT, right? Especially in software development. Where you don't really know what the deliverables are going to look like at the end. So you create these small teams which always have the customer represented on the team. So in traditional project management, my customer's out there and I consult with them regularly, but they're not on my team, right? Agile has them on the team making input. And what you do is you plan for sprints, like 2-week periods. You plan for a sprint. At the end of the sprint, you come together. You've tested your objectives. You look at the test results. Did we accomplish our objectives? And then you define the next 2-week sprint. What would be those requirements, right? And so the team is going to deal with the one requirement at a time in kind of a frozen scope until you achieve it, and then you'll move on. Where waterfall is more of a batch process, right? Where I've identified everything up front. Agile is a flow process, right? And so there's this 12 principles of agile project management. The book lists them out. They are listed here, very interesting. It was called the manifesto, right? A manifesto, and these are the agile principles. Very interesting, worth your read. So there are benefits to agile. They do say better project outcomes, and I would say that's true when the deliverable is difficult to define at the outset. But I get a better project outcome in this predictive or waterfall project management if I'm able to define the deliverable clearly up front. So the following outcomes are also waterfall related outcomes: increased customer satisfaction, improved morale, and increased collaboration and project visibility. I agree with all those for both. Coordination happens through integration management. I ask you to go back and refer to the beginning of that color slide I had, which shows you how much integration you really have to do. And the RACI is going to be a key item to help you do that. I wonder if de Lesseps of the Panama Canal fame used a RACI. I doubt it. And part of your paper should just, even if just from the research, just make recommendations on what they could have done better. That's a great paper. Okay, that was a side note. So process groups. So you can see integration management by looking at this slide. These things go in and out together, right? That initiating doesn't end and then planning begin, and planning doesn't end and execution begin. Notice execution and controlling are happening at the same time. And you're actually controlling, if you follow the line, even before you're doing your initiating work, like building the charter. And it's all about defining and aligning and controlling this iron triangle, the schedule, cost, and scope to meet stakeholders' expectations. Okay, couple of final slides on integration management that really come largely from the readings as we look to always integrate the life cycles. We already had this slide in a previous lesson, but notice at the end of each phase, we have a phase gate should we go on to the next phase. Then we do the initiating, planning, executing, controlling, closing, etc.